and taper the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. It covers state funds and local spending. So you have both that are capped at population and inflation, and it's one reason why they've done so well, even given the more Democrat blue direction they went for so long, that I hope more states will start to realize, this is the direction we need to be going. Hello, welcome to This Week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. On This Week's Economy, we separate pro-growth policy from political noise. While Washington spins its wheels, the real action is in the states, where tax reform, spending restraint, and school choice are either thriving or being throttled. Joining me today is my good friend, Patrick Gleason, Vice President of State Affairs at Americans for Tax Reform and a regular Forbes contributor. Patrick, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you, Vance.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And look, you're one of the best trackers that I know of fiscal trends in the states, from income tax and Reagan-style deregulation reforms to the rise of education freedom and the war on credit cards and a lot more. So today we're going to dig into who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and what needs to change if we want more opportunity and less government. There's a lot to go on here, and we're going to dig into a lot of this here for the audience, and it's going to be kind of back and forth as well. So a little bit different for us than you normally get on This Week's Economy, but there's no one else that I'd rather talk to than Patrick about this. So Patrick, let's go ahead and start with some of the fiscal restraint and kind of the budgeting. We've been working on for a number of years now is a sustainable budget project at Americans for Tax Reform, and looking at how are states doing compared with population growth plus inflation over time? Our research shows that only 4 states have had something where they actually kept spending in line with population inflation over the last decade, and 6 other ones, and that's all funds and state funds. There are 6 states in addition that have just done state funds. So there is a direction that we should be heading, but we are seeing maybe some overspending in some areas when you look at this. And if you tie that into, which I think we should, with tax reform, there's been a lot of key tax reform. So I kind of wanted to give this over to you, though, Patrick. When you look at budgeting, when you look at taxes, maybe who's doing it right and maybe who's doing it wrong here?
Yeah. So at this juncture in the year, let's see, we're almost at the halfway point in the year. But at this point in the year, most state legislatures have adjourned. And so there's a few that are left in session right now, but most have concluded business for the year. So we already have a good sense, even though we're halfway through the year, we already have a good sense of pretty much what every state will have done in totality for the year. You look at the revenue picture, while there's a lot of uncertainty out there, just because there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, that most states are in a positive revenue situation. There are a few states, particularly a lot of the major blue states, that are in negative revenue situations: California, New York, Illinois. Maryland and Maine come to mind, but most states are not in that position. So that's good news. And what we've seen states do this year, we've seen a lot of states put a lot of that surplus revenue towards tax relief. You mentioned states that have been doing a good job of keeping spending in check and how that's something we monitor. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a resource that I always try to bring up and remind folks about, which is the Sustainable Budget Project. So for any of your listeners, if you go to atr.org/budget project, you're going to see Vance's wealth of research. And it's an ongoing updated data set. And we look at how states are doing on spending in terms of relative to population growth plus inflation. And you mentioned the numbers. You mentioned 4 states have kept both state and federal funds below the rate of population growth plus inflation over the past decade. Those states, they deserve a shout out: Alaska, Colorado, North Dakota, Wyoming.
Yep.
You mentioned 6 states when it comes to just state funds have kept spending in line with population growth plus inflation. So they've been good stewards of their own funds, not so much with federal funds, which is a separate problem, which in too many states, lawmakers seem to view federal funds as free money that came out of nowhere, but that's a separate story for another day.
Yeah.
So you got 6 states on just state funds. That's Louisiana, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Montana, Ohio, Oklahoma. A lot of those probably aren't surprising, but some of them might be. And it changes from year to year. There's some that have been good actors in recent years, have fallen out of step. We had North Carolina had been a state. If you looked at measured from, this is looking from 2014 to 2024, but if you looked at from 2013 to 2023, North Carolina was one of the states that had kept state funds in line with population growth plus inflation.
Yeah.
While they've done a good job of keeping spending in check to the extent they have a surplus even this year, which has allowed them to have a number of income tax cuts scheduled for the coming years. They've fallen out in terms of keeping it in line with population growth plus inflation. So, some states are doing a good job. Some states aren't. As you might have explained to our listeners here before, later this summer, we'll have a comprehensive analysis once we have all the budgets in of how every state's done. But the big picture is states are showing you can exercise spending restraint. You can get it in line with population growth plus inflation. And it doesn't require big slashing of government. It's just growing more sustainably. So I think there's some lessons there for federal lawmakers, especially since it's clear that spending remains the issue and the challenge at the federal level, not lack of revenue. So we've seen some states doing a good job. Still, a lot of states need to do better. Talking about states, doing better or worse in some years rather than other. Tennessee, a state that had been keeping spending in line with population growth plus inflation. Then they had a couple budgets where they weren't. Then the last budget they did last year got it back in check. And so it's a constant struggle. But I think the benefit of that metric is, there's many decisions that decide how much a state spends, but it's good to have a metric where you're going to measure, are we spending too much or not? And so we've seen a lot. And good news is, there's the one state that has such a limit codified, Colorado, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. But even in states where they don't have a statutory or constitutional cap along those lines, they're still voluntarily keeping that benchmark in line. I know, particularly here, the guys in North Carolina and leadership, Senate President Berger and Speaker Destin Hall, they look at the budget and make sure where is that relative to population inflation. So they're always keeping that in mind. One thing I want to point out, and this has been the good news, is we've seen states continue to reduce and flatten state income tax rates. Going into this year, I was wondering, I'm sure you were as well, will the success continue? You wonder, are you on too much of a hot streak? Because we've had over half the country, over 25 states, red and blue, have enacted some form of income tax relief since 2020. And, how long can this momentum continue? A lot of it's certainly dependent on budget situations. But as you mentioned, both states still have positive budgets. And this year, I was surprised, not only did states not let off the throttle, they continued to put their foot on the gas. And so we had almost a dozen states cut income tax rates this year. And if you go to, actually, I would direct listeners to another resource, atr.org/map. And you can go and see the map of states that have cut income taxes this year, also states that have cut taxes in recent years. We also have a list of all the 14 states where you have governors or members of legislative leadership who've made a commitment to getting their income tax to zero, where your state is Texas. And then maybe I'll put a button on this there, which is not only have we had 11 states cut income taxes this year, but we had 2 states, and this is landmark, enact legislation that puts them on the path to zero.
Yes.
So they tried to go. It'll take over a decade, but still, it is now part of current law that those states, Mississippi and Oklahoma, are on the path to zero. And we've got a number of other states that I think are poised to join them next year. We've got Arkansas, where they passed 3 income tax rate cuts in 2 years. Sarah Sanders is quick to remind folks about and deserves a lot of credit for, and also leaders in the legislature there, Representative David Ray. You've got that going on. But we also got South Carolina, where I know you worked, where we've got some unfinished business. So South Carolina, and I'll end here, which is not only were they one of the 11 states that enacted income tax relief this year, they did so as part of a part of their budget. They sped up already enacted income tax relief. So in 2022, they enacted tax relief that took their top rate of 7% immediately down to 6.5, and then it stair steps them a tenth of a point a year until they get to 6% top rate. They're at 6.2% right now. They were supposed to go to 6.1 in January. The budget they enacted speeds that up, doubles the pace, so they'll go to 6.0 instead of 6.1 in January. So it gets them there quicker. But as you know, that's where the rate cut stops in accordance with the 2022 law. But the South Carolina House passed legislation before they adjourned in May that will not only take South Carolina from a top rate of 6% with a bottom rate of 3.5, take them over 5 years to a flat 1.99%, and then 5 years after that, so about a decade from now, would completely phase them out. And so that passed the South Carolina House this spring, early this summer. The Senate will take it up when they resume in January. Great news there. Key leaders in the South Carolina Senate, named Harvey Peeler, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Senate President Thomas Alexander, they have made clear they share the House's commitment to driving down the income tax rate as far as possible, including even to zero. And Governor Henry McMaster has also reiterated that he shares that goal. So South Carolina is on deck next year, but you've got, if that happens, you could have 3 states. We've at least got 2 set to join the club of no income tax states. We could have another one, but we are now just 1 state shy of having half the country have a flat, a 0% rate or some flat rate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Great overview there, Patrick.
Actually, real quick,
yeah, of course.
Real quick, point out, just to tie the bow on it, because we're talking about spending and how this is putting a lot of surpluses towards giving that back to taxpayers, because it's their money after all. So in South Carolina example, the tax package that would phase it down to 1.99 in 5 years and then to 0, that was scored as roughly almost $300 million a year in annual tax relief. Now that accounts for roughly half of South Carolina's, or one of the states with a surplus, projected ongoing surplus of $600 million roughly. So that the tax package that the House passed, the Senate will take up in January, that takes about half of their ongoing surplus and puts that towards phasing out the income tax.
Yeah.
So that half is a pretty good chunk. Can you tell how much the property tax relief you all enacted in Texas this year, how much of your surplus was that? Was it half like in South Carolina? And also, can you clarify the figure? Because I've seen varying reports. I've seen some people say tax relief enacted in Texas was $51 billion worth. I've seen other figures. Can you please clear up what's going on there? Because I see conflicting reports everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And there are a lot, even in Texas, there's a lot of confusion about what's happening and how much was out there. And so you're right. They're reporting that it was $51 billion that is in this budget to provide property tax relief. And if you add it up, and I've talked with the Legislative Budget Board and some other members, and I've got kind of the list of how this is all broken down, but basically there's only $6.5 billion of new property tax relief this session going in the next 2 years, which is about $3.25 billion a year to raise the homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000 for individuals for homesteads, right? And then for seniors, it goes up to $200,000. So you have some of that in there. There's also some property tax relief for businesses where they raise the itemized deduction, or not the deduction, but the inventory personal. It's called business personal private property tax from $2,500 exemption to, I think it's $25,000 now. So it's or maybe even higher, but it's a lot more than what it is today. But when you put all that together, Patrick, the $6.5 billion is new property tax relief that Texans will actually feel. There's another $3 billion that's for maintaining old relief. So that makes it $10 billion. But the other $40 billion, they're counting that because they go all the way back to like 2019 and some of the reforms that were made there and adding in how much was done each year to get up to $50 billion. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. And in fact, with the way it really is happening, what's really happening is that $50 billion is going to spend more on public schools. Because that's what they're doing. They're spending on public schools in order to compress or reduce the property tax rates or pay for the higher homestead exemption. So all this confusion, if you look at what's actually happening, to your point about the surplus, is we had a $24 billion surplus going into this session, and really only about a quarter, the $6.5 billion, is going towards actual new property tax relief of raising the homestead exemption. The rest is for past stuff. So if me as a Texas homeowner and having a homestead, what am I actually going to see in relief will be the $100,000 to $140,000. So that $40,000 increase in the homestead exemption, that will help my property tax to some capacity. But the vast majority of, or many people, I think, will still see higher property tax rates. Because Patrick, one thing you and I talked about even on the show is that if you're going to provide property tax relief, you've also got to make sure you have limitations that are strict on how much property taxes can keep going up. So there were some reforms that were put back in place in 2019 that says you can't go above 3.5% of new revenue, or you got to go out to the voters for cities, counties, and some special purpose districts, and 2.5% for school districts. But what they've done, Patrick, is there's all these loopholes. You get all the new property tax revenue, you get all of that, And then if you have a natural disaster, they've closed that somewhat, but there's still some natural disaster sort of loopholes. So if you have a natural disaster, you can go above the 2.5% or 3.5% rates. And what this has done is it's created a situation in Texas where the state is trying to reduce the school property tax rates. And some have said, well, let's put that on a path to elimination. Let's use surplus money, hopefully more than 25% like they did this time, maybe closer to 50% like South Carolina and some other places. But let's put this on a path to elimination. But what we're seeing is that the cities and counties and special purpose districts are raising their property taxes by more than what the state is reducing the schools. So property taxes continue to go up and hit record levels in Texas. And I think it goes to this point where, Patrick, across the country, we've seen some states talk about eliminating property taxes. We've seen Florida, North Dakota, was it Nebraska? Montana is talking some about this lately. So we've seen a lot of this, but we've got to make sure you do it right. If you're going to do it at all, you've got to have local spending limits, reining in government spending at the local level, and you got to have strict limitations so that they can't just get around it with these sort of loopholes, or you kind of run into this Texas problem because now we're passing historically high record budgets in Texas, $338 billion over a 2-year period. It's up 43% in state funds over just 4 years, which is about double population growth and inflation. So you were talking about some of those states earlier that had done well for a while, but maybe not in the last couple of years. Texas is one of those. We had Texas on our list of passing sustainable budgets up until 2 years ago because they started increasing spending at a rapid rate. So long story short, I think that Texas is in a spending frenzy where we're spending too much here and we're not providing as much in tax relief. And I think this is going to hurt the Texas economy if they keep going down in this direction.
So it sounds, these are, it sounds like there's important lessons that can be learned, particularly for lawmakers in other states that are looking to enact property tax relief, because the pain of property taxes and that's increased with rising property values, while it's been particularly bad in Texas, it's not unique to Texas. And there's states, Tennessee, North Carolina come to mind, but there are many others where lawmakers are looking to enact some form of property tax relief. North Carolina, for example, where they haven't been focused on there. That hasn't really been a concern. They've been so focused on getting the income tax rate down. Well, because so many localities have not controlled their spending in the way that state has here, the major cities and counties have been raising property taxes multiple times in recent years. And so that's woken up lawmakers to the need for some sort of state remedy, some sort of state limitation. So, and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what it seems to me that can be learned from Texas' experience for lawmakers who are looking to enact some sort of effective, meaningful property tax relief. It seems twofold. See if I'm missing anything, but it seems like it's twofold. One, you need a strong local tax cap, and that was one of the things I was bummed about that did not pass this session because you had a handful of bills, and maybe in a second you can talk about those and how they'd work. That would have put a meaningful cap on local spending, because that is really key to ultimately reining in tax burdens and property tax burdens overall, is keeping local spending limited. You need that. Two would be some sort of mechanism like the rollback rate you have mentioned in 2019, but learning from your mistakes without the exemptions for emergencies or new construction or other carve outs, so that it's a stronger limit. It seems like those two things, learning both from what you all have done and also some mistakes and things that have worked and not worked, there could be things if applied in other states where they're looking to do this. Property values in Nashville and Raleigh and Charlotte have been almost as crazy as Austin. And so there's some very similar dynamic there. Do you see those as the takeaways they could learn from your experience, or is there anything else?
No, I think those are the key things. And you're right. There were some bills, and there actually were the Governor Abbott was pushing for this. And, and sometimes, I tried, I wouldn't call it beat up, but I try to outline what's going on in the states, the legislature, not to hurt any of the politicians or anything like that, because I've worked with a lot of these guys. Back in 2019, I worked a lot with Betancourt and Burroughs and others to put these limitations in place. I mean, this is really what the research was showing, that we need more restrictions. But as you go through this, you learn, right, from what's happening, what works well and what doesn't. And I think what we're seeing now is, to your point, is those loopholes that they put in place to get them passed, because there was a lot of pushback. I mean, these guys went through hell in order to get those things done, because every local government official is coming out to testify and say, we can't do this. You're limiting our funding and everything. And so they put those in place now. But I think we're getting to a point where we're saying, all right, that was good, but let's move forward. And so I think a lot of people are talking about now is the no new revenue rate, meaning that if you want to go up by $1 in property taxes, you should go up to the voters on a uniform election date in November, not one of these May dates or March or something else, but in November, and allow for the voters to decide. I mean, states can't come in and they don't raise sales taxes every year. Why should the local governments be able to raise our property taxes like they do, kind of nilly-willy, just because they want to spend more money? So you tie that with that spending limit, a local spending limit. I like population growth plus inflation. That's what we've talked about a lot, but make it something that it's easy to understand for the public and for them not to be able to go above that unless they have some sort of supermajority vote or something like that. And Pat, you mentioned this earlier, but Colorado, a state that went basically red to purple to blue over time, they are still one of the ones that I think we point to as kind of a gold standard on their budget because of Tabor. And Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, it covers state funds and local spending. So you have both that are capped at population and inflation. And it's one reason why they've done so well, even given the more, Democrat blue direction they went for so long, that I hope more states will start to realize, this is the direction we need to be going.
Yeah. You actually, so you aside, you mentioned the local spending caps that didn't get through. That is one of a couple of reforms that I was bummed didn't get across the finish line, especially since it got through one chamber, but that I am hopeful maybe we'll get passed in another state, especially since you all don't come back into session in Texas until 2027, unless there's a special call. And then I am hopeful another state will pass, maybe hopefully before you all come back in 2027. So aside from a local spending cap of the kind we talked about, that would love to see either North Carolina, Tennessee, or one of the other states who are focused on property tax relief in the next year. That's one. You also mentioned the election uniformity measure that got through the state Senate, and I believe it died in the state House State Affairs Committee. Yeah, and that is a reform that is needed everywhere.
Yes.
Just for a little background for your listeners, that would require all local bond and tax increase measures to appear on the November general election ballot. We have a rampant problem across the country of local tax hikes and bond measures getting referred to as spring primary or other spring, summer special election ballots, or even odd year November ballots, when turnout is much lower. And what you have is a small single digit percentage of the electorate saddling millions of people in many cases, including many people not born yet, with years, if not decades, of higher taxes and spending obligations. And so we need
it makes it toward those interest groups, those ones who are really interested in that. They're the ones that go out and vote for it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the interests who want to raise those local taxes, who want those higher those bonds to pass, which will have to be paid with taxes. They love that because they know they can drive out the narrow beneficiaries of this. They can drive those out to the polls in elections when people aren't even aware and got other things to do and hardly anyone turns out. Yeah. So they love that. But things like that, as many people as possible should have to decide. I would, Republicans who don't like tax hikes, I think should want to have it be on that ballot because it's less inclined. The more people that turn out, the less inclined a tax hike is to pass. We have many examples of that. But even Democrats who talk about how much they love democracy should be for this. Yeah. Why would they not want as many people as possible to have decisions on these things? So was very bummed that did not get through the second chamber in Texas. But we're talking, Americans for Tax Reform is now talking about that with lawmakers in some other states. So hopefully we can get that done because it's needed everywhere. Would have loved to seen Texas be the first, but at least you guys can claim you led with the idea, and hopefully we'll see that. Then the third one that was bummed, the package of three, the local spending cap, the election uniformity, and the third one I was bummed that didn't get across the finish line that I hope does when you guys come back in 2027. But even before that, I hope it does in another state, is Senator Mays Middleton's prohibition on taxpayer-funded lobbying, preventing local governments from hiring contract lobbyists who typically lobby for higher taxes, higher spending, and they lobby against things like property tax relief. They lobby against things like local spending caps, all the type of things that we say are needed, that many conservatives say are needed. And so was once again got through one chamber, the Senate, failed in the House. was very bummed about that, especially since new speaker Dustin Burrows says he supports that reform.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that means it's eventually going to pass and that it'll have to wait till 2027. So bummed it didn't pass this year. I hope about 2027, especially now that you have a speaker who supports that, which is a huge shift in dynamic. Hopefully, though, someone else will pass it first. So, yeah, that's the package of my 3 bummer notes from Texas, but I remain hopeful they'll pass in 2027 there and earlier somewhere else.
I hope so, man. I mean, I think it's one of those things that just takes a number of sessions to get it out there, but you got to persevere and keep motivated and determined to do it. And given that leadership seems to be on board, hopefully they can get it done soon. If there is a special session, there's some calls to do that across Texas right now. So Abbott
has expressed support for that, banning taxpayer funded lobbying too. Yep. So you have a speaker who's on board. You have a governor who's on the record, public quotes in favor.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be if they are to do a special session, that would seem to be a logical addition to a special session call.
Yeah, man. Along with that local spending limit. I mean, just those 3 you just mentioned really go after local governments. Maybe that's the special session. That would be beautiful.
They should let us decide these things.
Yeah. That's right. Well, yeah, man. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Texas and others. Another big thing right now was, school choice. We've got the flat tax revolution and really the income tax revolution, hopefully is continuing to go on. Because as you said earlier, we could we're moving from 8 to 10 here pretty soon. Could even be 11 income tax states. It should be huge. Or huge, as Trump would say. But you also have the school choice revolution where now, so Texas did pass the school choice bill. It's not as big as what I would like. It's $1 billion, which sounds like a lot, but we've got 6.3 million school-age kids in Texas. 5.5 million of them are public schools, and then you have the rest of them are in private school, homeschool, and other types of schooling. And so if you look at the $1 billion and you say, okay, each kid can get on average about $10,000. It's $2,000 for homeschoolers, $10,000 for others, and you can get up to $30,000 if you have a disability or something. So, so there's probably at least, at most, I should say, about 100,000 students that will get it. And so what that means is that's only 1.5% of the entire school age population. And if you look at some of these other states that are starting theirs here soon, their ESAs, education savings accounts, our neighbor next door in Louisiana, they had 3% apply in their first year. And many of them weren't able to get it. So let's say we had 3%, Patrick, instead of the 1.5%, that would be 200,000 people that would apply and only 100,000 of them would get it. So I'm concerned, in Texas and some other states that we're getting excited about this school choice revolution. I think we should be. I'm a huge advocate for school choice. I want it to happen, but we got to be careful about how we're setting these things up because I don't want us to do is to set it up for failure. What happens if 100,000 kids can't get it and those parents come out and they blame the Republicans for not doing this and then they don't provide the funding next session? Because what just happened in Louisiana next door is that they didn't fund it to the amount of the waiting list. So they're going to have thousands of people who still won't get it for the following year. And that's not true universal school choice. I just talked to Robert Enlow recently and had him on the program from Ed Choice. And, they have this nice way to look at it is that you want all kids to be eligible. You want the dollars that are going to public schools to follow the child instead. And you want it to be funded fully. Those are the 3 things. And only 5 states actually have that now. It's like Florida, Arizona, and New Hampshire was the newest one, and there's a couple more that are in there. I think Arkansas is one of them. And then you have about 17 or 18 states in total with ESA programs, now Texas being one of them. And so we've got to get it to where it's truly universal. But maybe this is a good place to start that process. But I'm seeing this across the country, and I know ATR, we've been excited about what's happening here. Do you have any thoughts on this, though?
Yeah, so I know that you expressed some of the disappointment about maybe it being a little insufficient in terms of funding. I'm just so thrilled that Texas finally got it done after so many years of disappointment that I view this, while not being perfect, as hopefully a good starting point. Yeah. And that could be something either in a special session or in next regular session they expand in. And just some previous examples that might be applicable based on what you all run into. But while I think properly funding universal programs so that you have the funding is certainly would be the ideal way to do it. if you guys run into some of the funding problems you expect in Texas, I hope that prompts the sort of action that we saw in, for example, North Carolina, where the demand exceeded funding, and there was a number of applicants for the state's Opportunity Scholarship Program, the state's school voucher program, that were not going to be able to get it, that were eligible. And so the legislature came back and approved supplemental funding. Ideally, they wouldn't have had to do that supplemental funding. Ideally, they would have properly planned for that. But two things, I think where this insufficiency can be leveraged for positive action. In the case of North Carolina, one, it did prompt them to come back and provide additional funding that would have liked to see to begin with. And two, it underscored the fact that there is great demand for school choice, contrary to what opponents of school choice might claim. So I would say that looking at it with some optimism, a sense of optimism, some hope. Also, I would just say, talking about where we've got, it's amazing if you sit back and marvel perspective where we are, because there's a great Econ Talk podcast, Russ Roberts, where he interviewed Milton Friedman back. It was obviously very late in his life, but it was back.
It was in 2006, man. That was the year that he died. He died 2 months after that interview.
Wow. Okay, man, you're Johnny on the spot with the date. I can't remember what it was. So 2006. In that interview, I almost felt bad because he lamented the lack of progress on school choice. And you look back and you think, in 2006 compared to now, it's night and day in terms of we had none or no universal school choice states, now to roughly a dozen, varying degrees of sufficient funding. But people say, I've seen the general figure thrown up by EdChoice and others is a dozen or near a dozen states now have, or a dozen states have universal or near universal school choice. But if he could only been around 14 more, or now I guess 20 more, sorry, I'm losing a decade. If he could only been around, another decade and a half, he would have not said that, and he would have seen the thing he worked for come to fruition and bloom. And so it's amazing how much has happened on that front. Between that, what's happened on the income tax reduction flattenings, it's trying to be like join the no income tax club where Texas is. That it's truly amazing if you step back and look.
Well, that's some great points, Patrick, and a lot's happening in the fiscal areas when you look at spending and taxes across the states. And hopefully the federal government will take on some of this as well and say, you know what, we need to be spending and taxing less as well. And hopefully many other states, including blue states, will follow this lead. We've got a lot more to talk about when it comes to deregulation and interchange fees for credit cards and debanking and all that stuff. And the REINS Act, we're going to talk more about that with Patrick next month. And so don't miss that one as well. But we're going to go ahead and end there. Thank you, Patrick, for being on the Let People Prosper, or this week's economy show, I should say. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for all your key insights along the way. For the audience, thank you for joining us again today. Please share this with your friends and family. They too need to know what's happening across the states, because it's impacting our lives and how we're prospering in the process. And until next time, wait, one thing real quick is make sure you go check out at vanceginn.com all this information, or go to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. So with all that stuff going on, thank you for joining me today, and I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, God bless you and let people prosper.